Beep, 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 beep. Welcome to the Court of the EDI Jester. How are we, good people? Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and good night. And what have we got with you today? I've become a warrior, teacher, buy me a coffee, usual stuff, right? What have we got today? Well, I've got an article by Sonia Soda, which is in The Guardian. The Guardian, right? But it's The Observer, which is the kind of good bit of The Guardian is Observer. They do some really good reporting. They do some really good sort of investigative reporting, I think, I've not read this yet, so I thought I'd do a cold reading on this one. Not least of all, Sonia writes well, so it's easy to do cold readings that are written well. But also, I'm wondering whether I agree with it all. So I thought I'll stick that one in the corner, and then I'll have a go at it. Teachers need guidance to resolve issues of gender identity in the classroom. I'm almost interested in the nuance between those of us that are involved in the fight. Whether there's up to our eyeballs in this absolute goblet, and whether there's any nuance between us in what we think and what we think we should do and all the stuff that comes with it. So here we go. Government must urgently plug the policy gap currently being filled by ideology. The argument about the relative importance of sex and gender identity, whether someone feeling they are male or female should replace the reality of sex in law and society, has become one of the most polarising identity issues of our time. But out of this toxic mess, a sensible consensus has emerged. Okay, right. Sonia, it's cold reading, so you'll probably change it with something. Which path are you leading me down with this, right? Because there's red flags going off all over. I can hear them, they're in the kitchen. No, there are red flags going off all over, right? There is a sensible consensus. So, Sonia, let's keep going and find out, shall we? Both parties have largely ditched commitments to enshrine in law the view that people should be able to self-declare their sex for legal purposes. It has at last been acknowledged that this would effectively dismantle women's hard-won legal protections for single-sex spaces, services and sports, and these are not inconsistent with robust anti-discrimination protections for trans people. Yes, they are. Sonia, really? Really? We need something that really gets rid of it, Sonia. What are you doing here? Because I don't know how you can say that. How are you going to stop the LARPing fetishist from performing his fetish in the office without the consent of the people that are in the room, be them male or female? Turns up with all his, his nails and his knickers. How are you going to stop the fetishist, Sonia? Who are you talking to here? Honest to goodness. Have I got that wrong? You have a look you'll tell me in the comments. You always bloody do. I didn't like the way that your nose looked. What? Go away. Right? But Sonia, for what? Let's continue, just in case I'm losing the plot too quickly. But profound disagreements within government across the public sector continue to leave a policy vacuum that is being filled by activists with no understanding of existing law on sex and gender. A policy vacuum. Did Dyson make those? Nowhere is that more true than in schools. Ministers have for years been delaying guidance to help schools respond appropriately to children experiencing gender distress. Guidance that head teachers are desperate for in a world where adult activism has corrupted any hope of a shared understanding of the clinical evidence and existing law as applied to children. I disagree, Sonia. Right? I disagree. It's not an issue of clinical evidence and law. Right? There is no such thing as a trans child. I'm going to continue because, I'm just getting angry for no reason otherwise. At the end she's going to go, but of course, and I'm going to go, you idiot, you oof. But we'll see, shall we? Shall I be an oof today? On what constitutes clinical best practice? The affirmative approach is an ideological position grounded in a belief everyone has a gendered soul separate from their sex. So when children experience gender distress, it is a sign that gender identity differs from their sex and they should be affirmed as the opposite sex. To explore other reasons for their distress is to deny their identity. True. Appropriate ways of treating gender distress include puberty-blocking drugs, then cross-sex hormones. Appropriate ways? It's never appropriate. Again, stay calm, Barry. It may change by the end of the document because you're doing a cold reading. Stay calm. Stay calm. The evidence-based position is embodied by an independent review for the NHS by the distinguished paediatrician Hilary Cass. Its interim report underlined the lack of evidence for the affirmative approach that part of the NHS has been pushing on children. Gender dysphoria is a clinical condition in children. Well, it's not, it's body dysmorphia. Gender dysphoria needs to go, it doesn't exist. Gender distress can come and go until the early 20s, and in most young people resolves itself. So maybe, but is usually not a sign a child. So maybe, there's a comma missing, but is usually not a sign a child will go on to develop an adult trans identity. There's no such thing. What the hell are you talking about? Right, you're using their argot. I'm going to stop it, Barry. Right, Sonia, you're using their argot. What the hell are you doing? Capitulating is what you're doing. Stop it. I'll calm down. Have I got this wrong, Sonia? Tell me. Have I got this wrong? It can be associated with autism, children grappling with same-sex attraction, childhood trauma including sex abuse, and discomfort about puberty. Children have been prescribed puberty-blocking drugs, despite the fact they may inhibit gender distress resolving itself and cause long-term consequences for fertility, bone health, and brain development. Look, this is not despite the fact. Those are the facts. It's iatrogenic from the beginning. It's even iatrogenic for adults, for God's sake. Right? Adults, the suicide rate's crackers once the surgery has been through, because it isn't the answer, because this feeling they have, this insane feeling, which is then, shorn up by the bonkers gender identity believers, is something that causes them great problems when they get older, even if they have some operation with 100% failure rate, by the way, just to remind you, that makes them look like a facsimile of something not even vaguely resembling the other sex. I'm doing it again. I know it's cold reading, folks. That's why I get like that. I get a bit upset, right? Critically for schools, the Cash Review says that social transition, treating girls as though they were boys and vice versa, is not a neutral act, but an active intervention that can have long-term effects. That will have. Why are you being like this? That can have long-term effects on psychological functioning. NHS guidance now says it should only be done to alleviate clinically significant distress or impairment in social functioning. It shouldn't be done at all. Before the Cash Review, I had assumed social transition was pretty harmless. The reality is that it probably beds in, psychologically and socially, what might otherwise be temporary gender distress. And in young children who don't have the capacity to understand they haven't literally changed sex, it is effectively misleading them about reality. Thank you. Yep, Sonia. Okay. My heart rate is lowered. It should not be done without input from a mental health professional. It shouldn't be done at all. Stop it. It's certainly not something schools should be leading on. A watchful waiting approach that allows children to experiment while experiencing neither celebration nor negative reaction from adults will be more appropriate for most. How the hell are you going to manage that? Experimenting. What does that include? Saying they're the wrong, saying they're the other sex? Does that include a change of name? Does that include pronouns? Does it? It's education they need, not medication. Okay? Moreover, the law means schools are tightly prescribed in terms of what aspects of social transition they cannot facilitate. Safeguarding law requires schools to act to protect children from harm and promote their welfare. They must not discriminate against children experiencing gender distress, but this does not oblige schools to treat them as though they were of the opposite sex. If they are so distressed by this, they shouldn't be in school. They should be getting care somewhere else. Right? They shouldn't be in school disrupting the other children. They should be getting care somewhere else. Inclusion, my ass. Right. Schools are obliged to provide single-sex toilets for over 8s and changing facilities for over 11s. To force other children to pretend another child is of the opposite sex, for example, through mandated pronoun policies, is likely to constitute belief discrimination. They cannot do anything that would constitute sex discrimination against other children, for example, in relation to competitive sports or sleeping arrangements on residential trips. And schools must be politically impartial. They cannot teach partisan ideology, such as the idea that everyone has a gender identity and sex is assigned at birth, as fact, only as a contested set of belief. This is what gets me, right? They're not teaching it, Sonia. They're practicing it. They're practicing queer theory, gender. They're practicing postmodernism. They're practicing post-structuralism. This, campaigning groups with ideological positions so blunt they cannot possibly accommodate these complex medical and legal positions have stepped into the gap left by the government. Trans inclusion toolkits have been produced for schools that are uninformed by evidence on child development and safeguarding, and include legal misinformation such as telling schools they must treat gender questioning children as the opposite sex for all purposes. Many schools rely on relationship and sex education materials produced by external groups that teach gender ideology as fact, in a way that reinforces rather than challenges damaging stereotypes and may well encourage gender distrust in vulnerable children. That's right. Say it. They're practicing it in schools. The cult is practicing its religion in schools. The school system is decentralised, so it's hard to know the scale of the problem. Many schools will be getting the law right, but there are troubling stories of schools facilitating children's social transition without parental knowledge because they wrongly categorise a parent who shares their cash reviews concerns about the affirmative approach as a safeguarding risk to their own child. They'll do anything they can to make the trans child real, and I'm not sure this is open. Could be just me. You tell me in the comments as you will. They may wrongly believe a child must consent to information being shared with parents. That's all cobblers of the first order in that. And of children being referred by schools to affirmative charities that help them access harmful breast binders, or even GPs who prescribe puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones without parental knowledge, let alone consent. One parent I spoke to discovered that, even where a head agreed with her and her child psychologist that watchful waiting was the right approach, other senior staff disregarded the head's directions. That tells you all. You have active cultists, acolytes and adherents to the cult in the schools practicing queer theory, gender ideology, critical social justice, the whole fetid postmodern breast. Teat, sorry, from the udder. The postmodern udder. That's what's going on. The first step in helping schools understand their role has to be comprehensive government guidance on how to do this in a way that is commensurate with the law, the medical evidence, and their duty of care to all children. Sonia, what a great last paragraph. The first step in helping schools understand their role, comprehensive government guidance on how to do this in a way that is commensurate with the law, the medical evidence, and their duty of care to all children. Wonderful way to finish there. Bit fluffy, Sonia. But then I would say that, wouldn't I? I think the government needs to change the law. We need to repeal the GRA. We need to remove it from the Equality Act. We need to enshrine in law that there is no such thing as a trans child and there is no such thing as gender identity. I don't care what these people think they should be able to do. They're not going to do it. And from a personal perspective, if you're, an individual, don't accept it. Yes, there'll be a price that comes with it. There always is when the truth needs fighting for. But if you've got principles and you're not willing to fight for them when they're most hardest to fight for, then they aren't principles at all. Here are my principles, as Groucho said. If you don't like them, I've got others. I know it's difficult and I know it's hard. Right? From that perspective, reading that code, it smacks of both sides of them. I'm fed up with this both sides. There aren't two sides. There is the enemy and there is us. Get your head around it, okay? You don't tell children they're born in the wrong body. You don't affirm deluded kids in their fantasy. And you do not, under any circumstances, tolerate teachers, no matter who they are, no matter where they are, who profligate this belief system and do so against the wishes, as we saw in the article, of the senior staff. Fire them. It's not hard. Take the hit. Right, you're done. Get out. Get off the premises. Gross misconduct. And I think Prevent needs to get involved. Prevent needs to get involved because this rotting of our institutions by these absolute lunatics practicing this nonsense is a Prevent issue. They are literally causing terror in these organisations. People can't speak up. They're frightened of losing their jobs. They don't want to say the wrong thing. If that isn't terrorism, I don't know what is. Prevent needs to get involved. You tell me if I got it wrong, because Sonia's a wonderfully reasonable person, and I've read her stuff before and it's always very good. But on this particular one, on the cold reading, Sonia, you need to stop doing this because you're perpetrating a both sides idea. There is no both sides. There is no both sides. You've got to get your head around it. Okay, this cult damages children and adults alike, and the sooner we end it, the better for everybody concerned. I'll see you later.